Year at college was supposed to be the start of something exciting: new friends, new experiences, a chance to figure out who I was. I'd chosen a small liberal arts school, nestled in a quiet wooded area, the kind of place that felt peaceful during the day, but took on an entirely different vibe at night. I was assigned a dorm room on the third floor of an old brick building, one of the original structures from when the school was founded over a century ago. The halls were narrow, the floors creaked with every step, and the walls were thin enough that you could hear muffled conversations from the rooms next door. My roommate, a guy named Ethan, seemed normal enough at first: quiet, a little shy, but friendly in his own way. We got along fine for the first few days, settling into a routine of classes, meals, and late-night study sessions. It was about a week into the semester when things started to feel off. I'd come back to the room after a night out with some new friends I'd made in my intro to psych class. It was late, maybe around midnight, and the dorm was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater kicking on. Ethan was sitting at his desk, hunched over his laptop, the blue glow of the screen lighting up his face. I said, "Hey," asked how his night was, but he didn't answer, just kept typing, his fingers moving faster than I'd ever seen. I figured he was deep into some assignment, so I let it go, climbed into bed, and turned off my lamp. The room went dark except for that eerie light from his screen. I tried to sleep, but something about the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. That's when I heard a faint tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from his side of the room. I sat up, squinting through the darkness, and realized he wasn't typing anymore. His hands were resting on the desk, but his head was turned slightly, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I asked what he was doing, and he just muttered, "Nothing," in this flat, hollow voice that sent a chill down my spine. I didn't push it. I just pulled the covers over my head and willed myself to sleep. The next morning, Ethan was gone when I woke up. His bed was made, his laptop was closed, and everything looked normal. I brushed off the weirdness from the night before, chalking it up to stress or maybe too much coffee. Classes kept me busy all day, and by the time I got back to the dorm that evening, I'd almost forgotten about it. Ethan was there when I walked in, sitting in the same spot, staring at his laptop again. I tried to make small talk, asked about his day, but he barely responded, just nodded, or gave one-word answers. It was awkward, but I didn't think much of it. I had a paper to finish, so I sat up at my desk, popped in my earbuds, and got to work. Hours passed, and the dorm grew quieter as people settled in for the night. Around 2 a.m., I decided to call it quits and shut off my light. Ethan was still awake, his screen glowing like a beacon in the dark. I didn't say anything this time, just turned over and closed my eyes. That's when the tapping started again. Slow at first, like a finger drumming lightly on wood, but then it got louder, more insistent. I sat up, annoyed, and asked Ethan what the hell he was doing. He didn't answer. I could see his silhouette in the dim light, sitting perfectly still, hands in his lap. The tapping wasn't coming from him, it was coming from the wall behind his desk, the one that separated our room from the empty storage closet next door. I asked if he heard it, and he nodded slowly, still not looking at me. "It's been doing that all week," he said, his voice so quiet I almost didn't catch it. I laughed, thinking he was messing with me, but his expression didn't change. He just stared at the wall, unblinking, like he was waiting for something. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just old pipes or the building settling, but the sound kept going: tap, 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 steady as a heartbeat. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone, and used the flashlight to check the room. Nothing seemed out of place. I even pressed my ear to the wall, but the tapping stopped the second I touched it. Ethan didn't move, didn't say a word, just watched me with this blank look on his face. I asked if he'd told anyone about it, like the RA or maintenance, but he shook his head. "They won't do anything," he said, and that was it. I climbed back into bed, unsettled but too tired to deal with it. Eventually, the tapping faded, and I drifted off. The next day, I decided to ask around. I caught up with our Ra, a senior named Mia, during lunch and mentioned the noise. She frowned, said she hadn't heard any complaints, but promised to check it out. I also talked to a couple guys down the hall, but they just shrugged and said old buildings make weird sounds all the time. It didn't feel like a good enough explanation, but I let it go. That night, though, things got worse. I came back from the library around 10, and Ethan was already in bed, lights off, which was unusual for him. I kept my desk lamp on low, figuring I'd finish some reading before crashing. The room was silent, no tapping. No nothing, just the occasional rustle of pages as I flipped through my textbook. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan sat up in bed, stiff as a board, and stared at me. His eyes were wide open, glinting in the faint light, and his mouth was set in this tight, unnatural line. I froze, book still in my hands, and asked if he was okay. He didn't answer, just kept staring, unblinking, for what felt like forever. Finally, he whispered, "It's not the wall," and lay back down like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside had me on edge. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When I woke up, Ethan was gone again. But this time, his stuff was messed up books scattered on the floor, clothes pulled out of his dresser, like he'd been searching for something in a hurry. I didn't see him in class or at the dining hall, and he didn't answer my texts. By the time I got back to the dorm that evening, I was starting to worry. His laptop was still there, open on his desk, but the screen was black. I tapped a key, and it flickered to life, showing a document filled with gibberish random letters and numbers. Pages and pages of it, like he'd been mashing the keyboard for hours. At the bottom, in all caps, was one line that made my stomach drop, ITS, under the floor. I stood there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The room felt smaller, the air colder, and for a second, I swore I heard that tapping again, faint, but closer, like it was coming from right beneath me. I grabbed my phone and called Mia, told her everything, Ethan acting weird, the noises, the message on his laptop. She came over within 10 minutes, took one look at the room, and said she'd get maintenance and campus security involved. While we waited, she asked if I'd noticed anything else strange about Ethan. I told her about the staring, the tapping, how he'd barely left the room all week. She nodded, her face pale, and said she'd heard rumors about our building, old stories from decades ago, about a student who'd disappeared. Last seen in one of the third-floor rooms. She didn't know the details, just that people said the place was off ever since. Maintenance showed up with a security guard, and they started poking around. They tapped on the walls, checked the closet, even lifted the rug under Ethan's desk. That's when they found it, a loose floorboard, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The guard pried it up with a crowbar, and the second it came loose, this stench hit us damp, sour, like something rotting. I covered my nose, peering over Mia's shoulder as they shined a flashlight into the gap. There was a crawl space down there, maybe 2 feet deep, lined with dirt and cobwebs, and in the beam of light, I saw something move small, pale, skittering out of sight before I could make sense of it. The guard swore, dropped the flashlight, and told us to get out of the room. Mia grabbed my arm, and we stumbled into the hall as security called for backup. They wouldn't let me back in that night. I crashed on a friend's couch on the first floor, trying to process what I'd seen. The next morning, Mia found me at breakfast and said they'd searched the crawl space. They didn't find Ethan, but they did find something else, scratches on the underside of the floorboards, deep and jagged, like someone had clawed at them from below. There were also bits of fabric, torn and dirty, that didn't match anything in our room. Campus police got involved, but they didn't have much to say, just that Ethan was officially missing, and they were looking into it. I got reassigned to a new dorm across campus, and for a while, I thought that was the end of it. But a few weeks later, I started hearing it again, the tapping. It was faint at first, easy to dismiss as my imagination, but it got louder over time. Always at night, always when I was alone. I'd check the walls, the floors, even under my bed, but there was never anything there. One night, I woke up to it right next to my ear, sharp and insistent, like fingernails on wood. I bolted upright, flipped on the light, and saw my new roommate still asleep across the room. The sound stopped, but my desk chair pushed neatly under the desk when I'd gone to bed was now in the middle of the floor, turned to face me. I didn't sleep after that. I kept the lights on, my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for sunrise. I never saw Ethan again. No one did. The school hushed it up, said he dropped out, left campus without telling anyone. But I knew better. Whatever was in that crawl space, whatever he'd heard under the floor, it didn't let him go. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had followed me. The tapping became my shadow, a constant reminder that something was watching, waiting, just out of sight. I finished the semester, but I didn't go back after winter break. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those scratches, heard that laugh Ethan let out when he said it wasn't the wall. And deep down, I knew whatever it wasn't done with me yet.